Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we take a look at the comic book storyline Man-Bat vs. Batman. Man-Bat vs. Batman is a comic published in 1984 that reprints the three very first Man-Bat stories, unofficially known as the original Man-Bat trilogy. The first part, Challenge of the Man-Bat, was originally published in Detective Comics number 400, the second, Man or Bat, in Detective Comics number 402, and the third, final part, Marriage Impossible, in Detective Comics number 407. All these three issues were originally published in 1970 and were written by Frank Robbins and penciled by Neal Adams. In the first story, we are introduced to Kirk Langstrom, a zoologist working at the Gotham Natural History Museum. Langstrom specializes in bats, and using a bat gland extract, he is secretly attempting to create a serum which will dramatically enhance the human's hearing capabilities. Thinking he succeeded, Kirk tries the serum on himself, only to find himself turn into a hideous bat monster. Later, a group of burglars break into the museum, but their heist is interrupted by the Batman. However, the burglars get the upper hand, and then Kirk, as Man-Bat, dashes out of nowhere, attacks the criminals, and saves the Dark Knight. It turns out that Langstrom idolizes Batman for his heroism and use of the bat as a symbol. The meeting between the Batman and the Man-Bat is however brief, as distraught over his appearance, Langstrom flees and disappears into the night. In the second story, we find Langstrom resorting to acts of crime in the attempt to find a cure for his condition. He is still noble though, as he intends to pay for himself, and even helps Batman knock out yet another group of thieves. This is where the two's alliance meet an end, however, as Kirk is determined to take what he came for, something which Batman cannot allow, no matter how Langstrom justifies it. We are also introduced to Kirk's loving and worried fiancée, Francine Lee, who wonders what has become of the man she loves. In an attempt to catch Man-Bat, the Dark Knight contacts Francine, and together they find out that Kirk's condition is only worsening, and he actually sprouts wings, enabling him to fly. In the third, final story, we meet a Kirk Langstrom who's fully transformed into a bat creature, and he's now more animal than man. Langstrom no longer wants to seek a cure, which Batman tries to offer him, but instead, he wishes to remain a Man-Bat and effectively fights the Batman off. Desiring a mate, Man-Bat goes to Francine and tells her that if she truly loves him, she too will take the serum and become like him so that they can be together. The torn woman eventually agrees, and they join each other in an unholy union. If they're ever to become human again, Batman must find a way to inject them both with the cure, which is definitely easier said than done, considering it's two monstrous flying beasts he's dealing with. Despite being nearly 50 years old now, this trilogy holds up very well still to this day in my opinion. It's the classic, timeless story of a well-meaning scientist who accidentally transforms himself into a hideous monster. We've gotten this type of story numerous times throughout modern history, but it's one that works really well. There's just something incredibly compelling about a tale that's about a man who's deformed and twisted into something terrible, losing himself and his humanity. We humans fear the transformation of our physical bodies into something monstrous, and we also fear the loss of control of our minds, being deprived of rational thought. That's exactly what we see happen to Kirk Langstrom in this trilogy. The transformation is handled very well too. He doesn't just instantly become a mindless monster that flies around and wrecks things. Instead, Langstrom slowly and gradually devolves into the Man-Bat. At first, he still has his intellect intact, even though his body has changed. He even insists on wearing suits, meaning that his human side is still the dominant one. But as time wears on, his mutation worsens, affecting Kirk's mind, making him more primitive. By the end of the second story, Langstrom is even unable to understand that Batman is actually trying to help him, and instead interprets the Dark Knight's attempts as hostility, just like an animal would. By the third story, Kirk has regressed so far that there is no part of his human side left at all, leaving only a wild beast. We've gotten many Man-Bat stories after these three, but none of them quite capture the horror and tragedy of Kirk Langstrom's metamorphose like this trilogy does. It's the best and the definitive Man-Bat story in my opinion, and that's very impressive considering it was published in 1970. In those days, arcs like this one were pretty uncommon in Batman comics, and most of the Dark Knight's adventures were just one-shots with little to no continuity. You could say that this comic was a bit of a catalyst for change towards more sophisticated and in-depth storytelling. It was also darker than the usual Batman stories of the era. All of this was of course a conscious change on the part of DC following the cancellation of the Batman TV show in 1968. With the popularity of that show completely gone, DC wanted to move as far away as possible from the camp and corniness it represented. Thus they hired new creators such as Robbins and Neal Adams to gradually bring back the darker tone of the early Batman stories by Bill Finger and Bob Kane. Publishing this trilogy in 1970 was a masterstroke in my opinion. What better way to make people forget about this than by introducing a new, monstrous villain in a three-part horror epic. Man-Bat is a perfect foe for the Batman as well, as they're basically exact opposites. While Batman is more man than bat, Kirk is more bat than man, and he actually is everything that the Dark Knight only pretends to be. They couldn't have hired two better guys to do this story than Robbins and Adams either. For the most part, Robbins' writing avoids the problems that were so common in those days, such as very unrealistic dialogue and poorly handled exposition. And when it comes to Adams' art, what can you say that hasn't been said already 1,000 times? I mean, there's a reason why he's the most legendary bat artist in all of history. Compared to the other pencilers at the time, he's miles ahead of them in terms of skill. I'm not trying to knock those other artists. Most of them are great too, and I love their work as well. Heck, Adams isn't even my favorite Batman artist. But there's no denial that few can match his attention to detail and realism, nor can many draw such dynamic figures as he does. There's not a single page drawn by Neal Adams that's boring or stiff. They're all masterpieces in their own right. In conclusion, this is a must-read for every Batman fan, as it's not only the greatest Man-Bat story, but really one of the best Batman stories in general. I'd maybe even put it in the top 10. If you're going to pick it up, I recommend that you get this 1984 reprint, as it contains all three stories and is dirt cheap. You can get it in fine condition for about $3, which is a hell of a lot cheaper than the original issues, which you will have to pay a very hefty sum of money for. So, there you have it. That's Man-Bat vs. Batman, the first and greatest Man-Bat story ever told. Remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.